In the book of Exodus, we read about Moses coming to Pharaoh and saying, "Let my people go." And then he pronounced, because Pharaoh wouldn't let them go, he pronounced upon them judgments and plagues and calamities upon the land and upon the livestock and upon the people themselves, until Pharaoh eventually gave up and said, "Go, get out of my country." Were these just particular things that God wanted to do, like lice and flies and blood, etc.? Or was there another reason why there were 10 plagues, 10 things that happened there in Egypt? That's what we're looking at in this video. Hello, my name is Stephen, and this is Faith Ministries. So in Exodus chapter 7, all the way through to Exodus 12, we read about how the plagues, as it were, came upon the land and the people and the livestock of Egypt. And in first reading, we just think these are natural, these are things which God just orchestrated and think, yep, I can send lightning, I can send hail, I can send lice, I can send flies. But what was the reason behind it? Now, you may remember, in the late 1990s and into the years 2000s, there was a very popular television program that came out of America called SG-1, Stargate 1. And they used to travel through these tunnels into other planets, and they met these creatures called Goa'uld. But in the midst of all this, they kept meeting these aliens that had taken on the personalities of Egyptian gods. We had gods like Anubis, gods like Horus, and gods Ra. So what's that got to do with today's message? As you can see here, the Exodus plagues were actually God's way of executing judgment on the Egyptian gods. And we'll just go through those in a moment. And we'll have a look at the gods of Egypt that were attacked and judged by God. You know, initially, the ancient Israelites in Egypt enjoyed their favor because of Joseph, all that he had accomplished for them, Pharaoh second in command. But as the years passed, as we know, the relationship changed, and the Egyptians began to view the Israelites as a threat because they became quite a strong force within Egypt itself. In Exodus 12, verse 12, it says, "And I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt, I will execute judgments. I am Yahweh." So the whole thing of the plagues was to do with executing judgments against the gods of Egypt. The people of Israel stood out as being separate there in the land of Goshen, but they were slaves. They were, generation after generation after generation, they had been influenced by all these false gods around about them. For the Egyptians worshipped many gods, many goddesses, represented in the forms of animals, bulls and cows and rams, goats, crocodiles, cobras, frogs, and even insects and birds. They were considered sacred. And each of these plagues God sent was a direct challenge to one or more of those Egyptian gods. What are you doing? Can you stop the Almighty God, the one true God? No, I don't think so. So on this infographic of ancient Egyptian deities, I'll just give you an idea that how they drew them. Over here on the left, we had the god of Ra, and he had that sort of symbol. And he was the god of the sun, principal god, he was the creator of the universe, source of all life. We had the god of Bastet, a goddess of cats, of love, of home, of joy, of motherhood, etc. The god of Thoth, a god of wisdom, writings, hieroglyphics, science, maths, etc., magic. Isis, who looked like a woman, mother of God, mother goddess, goddess of the sky, of magic and wisdom, goddess of kingship, etc., the protection. Then we have Osiris, god of fertility, alcohol, agriculture, the afterlife, the dead, etc. Horus, god of kingship. Sky played a key role in Osiris myth. And Anubis, god of death, mummification, embalming, etc. So they had some quite strange looking gods, but these were just a sample of them at that time. So on this page, we have the 10 plagues. Plague number 1, water turned into blood in Exodus chapter 7. The gods of Egypt that were affected were Khnum, who was the guardian of the river source, Hapi or Hapi, god of the Nile, and Osiris, the Nile was his actual bloodstream. And actually it was interesting that it was actually duplicated by the Egyptians themselves. They were able to turn water into blood, or what looked like blood. And this occurred in Goshen, and it ended up, because of the water turning into blood, there was dead fish everywhere, and there was that putrid smell. The second plague, the plague of frogs in Exodus chapter 8, 1 to 15. The gods that were affected was the frog goddess to Egypt, Hapi, and the frog goddess Hakwet, which were again duplicated by the Egyptians and again occurred in Goshen as well as across Egypt itself. Plague number 3, we had the plague of lice in Exodus 8, 16 to 19. And the Egyptian god that was affected at that stage was Seb, the earth god of Egypt. Now, it's interesting that it was not duplicated by the Egyptians. It did occur also in Goshen as well as in the rest of Egypt, and it was attributed to the finger of God. Number 4, we have flies in Exodus chapter 8, 20 to 32, and the god that was affected was the fly god of Egypt called Uwachit. And at this stage, it's interesting that God separates the Egyptians from the Israelites, and there are no more plagues coming upon the Israelites, only upon from the Egyptians themselves. Plague number 5, disease upon the death upon the cattle in Exodus 9, 1 to 7. This was the goddess with a cow head, Hathor, the bull god, the symbol of fertility, Hapis, and the sacred bull of Heliopolis, Minervis, and it resulted in the death of livestock across the country, which would have been a terrible smell eventually. Number 6, the 6th plague was a plague of boils in Exodus 9, 8 to 12. And this came against the goddess of epidemics, Sekhmet, the god of healing, Serapis, the god of healing also called Imhotep, and also the pestilence god, Sunu. And this affected the people's bodies, so they came out in boils all over their bodies. And the Pharaoh's magicians, they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't even appear in court before Pharaoh because they were so afflicted by the boils themselves. And then the 7th plague, the plague of hail, which came across the nation, smashing trees, smashing vegetation and housing, was Exodus 9, 13 to 35. This came against the sky goddess Nut, the agricultural deities of Isis and Seth, the god of the atmosphere, Shu, and the god of crops and fertility, Osiris. And this one was actually historically unique for this particular type of storm. Such a massive hailstorm was not common in Egypt at that time. And it's interesting also to note that Pharaoh confesses his sin. He acknowledges that he's done wrong in not letting the children of Israel go to worship God. Anybody later changes his mind. And then the 8th plague, the plague of locusts in Exodus 10, 1 to 20. And this comes against the protector from locusts, a god called Serapia, and also the agricultural god Osiris once again. And Pharaoh suggests a compromise, but the compromise is rejected by Moses. And again, Pharaoh confesses his sin, that he has done wrong. But again, he turns back. The 9th plague, darkness across the land. Exodus 10, 21 to 29. This comes against the various sun gods, Amon-Ra, Re, Aten, Atum, and Horus. They come against the moon god, Thoth, and also the sky goddess, Nut and Hathor. And it is dark, so dark you could not see your hand in front of your face, but there is light in Goshen. And our people of Israel, they could see, they could move around like normal, and life was normal for them. And then finally, plague number 10, the death of the firstborn in Exodus 12:29-36. Judgments on all gods, including Pharaoh himself. There was Min, the god of reproduction, Isis, the goddess who protected children, and Haket, the goddess of birth. You know, in Exodus 1, Pharaoh kills the firstborn of the Israelites, trying to stop the Israelites from reproducing quickly. And we see the story of Moses being saved by his mother. But now God turns around. He kills the firstborn sons of the Egyptians themselves. And in Exodus 14, eventually Pharaoh will lose even his army, that mighty army that has spread the kingdom of Egypt out to various places around the Middle East. He would lose his army when the waters came crashing down upon them and drowned them in Exodus 14. So, in these various chapters of the book of Exodus, when Moses kept coming to Pharaoh saying, "Let my people go," they weren't just indiscriminate catastrophes and horrible things that came upon Egypt. No, God was recognizing that these were false gods. These were false gods that the Egyptians had set up to worship, and they were influencing the people of Israel. And he was saying, no, these gods are false. They have no power. I am bringing hail. I am bringing boils. I am bringing locusts. I am bringing darkness. And there is nothing that Pharaoh can do, nothing that these false gods can do to stop them. He showed himself as being the Almighty God, as being Yahweh, the God of the universe, God of all creation, the God who came to set his people free and to bring them back to the promised land. That was what happened in those 10 plagues. They were judgment against the gods of Egypt. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe so other people may see it. And until next time, God bless.